Imagine this. You wake up one morning and the zombie apocalypse has actually broken out. Cities have collapsed overnight. Streets are littered with abandoned cars. Stores have been stripped bare, and governments are nothing more than a memory. There's chaos everywhere, and you'll now need to do everything you can to survive. But in a country as massive as America, where you are actually makes a huge difference. So in this video, we're breaking down the top 5 worst states to be in during a zombie apocalypse. These are places you really don't want to end up when the world falls apart. Before we jump into the list though, let's set some ground rules for this apocalyptic thought experiment. These aren't Olympic sprinters or mutated monsters. We're keeping it classic with the slow, shambling, horror movie zombies. They're clumsy, but what they lack in speed, they make up for in sheer numbers. 1 zombie is nothing. 10 zombies is manageable, but hundreds or even thousands? Their strength isn't in brains. It's in overwhelming numbers, and that's where things can get ugly. The government has already collapsed. Order is gone, and panic has swept through the streets. Laws don't matter, and survival is every man for himself. You are just an average American. Maybe you've got a couple weeks of food in the pantry. You probably own a car, but you're not a Navy SEAL or a doomsday prepper with an underground bunker probably. You're just a normal person trying to stay alive in total chaos. Now with the rules all set, let's dive into the states that would be an absolute nightmare if the undead ever came knocking. Number 5, Florida. Florida may be the Sunshine State, but in a zombie apocalypse, it quickly becomes one of the most dangerous traps in the country. The first and most obvious issue is population. With more than 22 million residents and millions of tourists pouring in each year, Florida is bursting at the seams with people. Cities like Miami, Orlando, and Tampa are tourism hubs where the theme parks, beaches, and cruise ports funnel massive crowds into confined areas. Once infection spreads, these places would turn into chaotic death zones overnight. Evacuation would be another nightmare. Florida is a long peninsula with very few ways out. Once those interstates heading north become clogged with abandoned cars, millions would be trapped in a bottleneck. Highways are already infamous for standstill traffic during hurricane evacuations. Add zombies into the mix, and it's game over. Then comes the environment. Florida's subtropical climate means extreme heat, suffocating humidity, and relentless thunderstorms. Without power and air conditioning, heat stroke and dehydration would become serious killers. And when the rainy season floods entire neighborhoods, survivors would be wading through knee-deep water, which is the absolute perfect breeding grounds for mosquitoes and waterborne diseases. And half the problem with apocalypse is dealing with diseases. The natural landscape is no ally either. The Everglades may look like a refuge, but it's a swamp crawling with alligators, snakes, and insects. Venturing there without proper supplies is just trading zombies for predators. Coastal living isn't safe either, because hurricanes remain a yearly threat. Imagine boarding up your shelter while thousands of zombies are pushing inland by storm surges. Florida's demographics add another complication in that it is one of the largest elderly populations in the US. In an outbreak, many wouldn't be able to evacuate quickly, creating both humanitarian crises and faster zombie spread in retirement communities and nursing facilities. Between its overpopulation, lack of escape routes or routes depending on where you're from, brutal climate, deadly wildlife, and seasonal natural disasters, Florida offers no real safe haven. What was once a vacation paradise becomes a pressure cooker of chaos where nature and the undead are equally determined to take you down. Number 4, Hawaii. At first glance, Hawaii might seem like a dream hideout during the apocalypse. Remote islands surrounded by endless ocean, lush jungles, and no mainland traffic to worry about. But in reality, Hawaii is one of the most dangerous places you could be once the zombies arrive. The state's greatest weakness is its dependence on imports. Almost 90% of Hawaii's food and supplies come in by ship or plane. Once airports and harbors are shut down, whether by panic, military collapse, or zombies overrunning ports, those shipments are just going to stop immediately. Grocery store shelves would be bare within days, and rationing would quickly turn ugly. Fuel shortages would grind transportation to a halt, leaving survivors stranded in overcrowded neighborhoods. Honolulu is the epicenter of the problem. With nearly 1 million people crammed into Oahu, the outbreak would spread like wildfire. High-rises and tight residential areas mean once infection starts, there's little room to run. And when the city falls, the rest of of the island is too small to absorb the flood of desperate survivors. Water is another crisis. Fresh water is limited on the islands, and while some residents collect rainwater, it wouldn't be nearly enough to sustain large populations. Rivers and natural catchments can't support millions long term, especially once sanitation systems fail and contamination spreads. Geography makes escape nearly impossible. Unlike the mainland, there's no drive west until you're safe option. You're surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. Even if you manage to secure a boat, where do you go? Without fuel and navigational equipment, you're likely adrift long before reaching safety. And then there are the natural hazards. Hawaii's volcanic terrain is stunning, but unforgiving. Dense jungles and rugged cliffs limit movement and visibility. Hurricanes and tsunamis are real threats, and in an already chaotic world, they could wipe out entire survivor camps. Add to this the risk of wildfires and landslides, and the environment itself becomes another enemy. In short, Hawaii is paradise turned prison. Once the supply chain collapses, starvation, dehydration, and overcrowding would finish you off long before the zombies do. Number 3. New Jersey. New Jersey's nickname is the Garden State. But don't let that fool you, since in a zombie apocalypse, it's one of the most suffocating and dangerous states you could end up in. With more than 9 million residents packed into a small footprint, New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the country. That means once infection spreads, it spreads everywhere. Cities like Newark, New Jersey, and Trenton would collapse immediately, while small towns would be overwhelmed by desperate evacuees fleeing New York. And that's the second problem: the location. Being right next to New York City, which is arguably the single worst hotspot in America, but more on that later, New Jersey becomes the first stop for millions of panic survivors and infected alike. Bridges, tunnels, and highways connecting the two would become choke points, swarming the chaos. New Jersey wouldn't just face its own outbreak, it would inherit New York's too. Infrastructure only makes matters worse. The state is infamous for brutal traffic jams, and in a mass exodus, highways like the Turnpike and Parkway would become endless parking lots of stranded cars, which make perfect feeding grounds for zombies. Escape inland isn't much better. Unlike bigger states, New Jersey doesn't have vast forests or mountains to hide in. Its limited wilderness means survivors would be forced to scavenge in populated, dangerous areas. Then comes the weather. Winters are bitter, and without power, heat, or shelter, survivors risk freezing as much as being eaten. Snowstorms could trap people in place, cutting off already scarce resources. Summers bring heavy humidity and violent thunderstorms, further complicating survival. New Jersey's combination of high population, proximity to New York, nightmarish traffic, and harsh seasonal swings make it a pressure cooker of disaster. Once the outbreak begins, it won't just be zombies you'll fight. It'll be overcrowding, starvation, and the cold itself. Survival here isn't unlikely, it's almost impossible. Number 2. Nevada. Nevada might look like a survivalist dream with its open deserts and endless horizon. But once you scratch the surface, it's one of the least survivable states in a zombie apocalypse. The most immediate danger is population concentration. Las Vegas alone has over 2 million residents, plus a constant wave of tourists. The Strip would collapse in hours, with casinos, hotels, and nightclubs packed with panicked people. Try saying that 3 times fast. Elevators stuck with the infected, and streets jammed with abandoned cars. Tourists unfamiliar with the desert would add even more chaos, and once infections spread through casinos, escape routes would clog instantly. Beyond Vegas, Nevada's geography is a nightmare. Almost the entire state is desert, which means extreme heat during the day and freezing cold at night. Without reliable shelter or power for cooling and heating, survivors face heat stroke by day and hypothermia by night. This makes it incredibly difficult to survive since you'll barely find any shelter outside. The lack of natural water is also Nevada's deadliest weakness. The state depends heavily on the Colorado River and Lake Mead, which are already shrinking in modern times. But the problem is that once supply lines collapse, survivors will be left with almost nothing. Water wars and raids would break out long before zombies wipe everyone out. Agriculture is minimal in Nevada, so food scarcity would hit fast. Deserts don't grow crops easily, and livestock wouldn't last without feed and water. Even trying to just head out into the desert is suicidal. Outside of cities, you face hundreds of miles of bare land with no shade, no resources, and no easy way to resupply. With roads blocked and fuel limited, vehicles won't save you either. In short, Nevada combines the worst of both worlds: massive urban infection hotspots and an environment so unforgiving it kills survivors faster than zombies. It's less about if you die there and more about how quickly. Number 1. New York. At the very top of the worst states to survive a zombie apocalypse sits New York, and it's not even close. The biggest reason is the density of the entire state. New York City alone has over 8 million people packed tightly into a limited space. Once an outbreak begins, the infection rate would skyrocket, and escape would be nearly impossible, as bridges and tunnels out of Manhattan would instantly be overwhelmed as choke points get clogged with terrified crowds. Manhattan itself is an island, meaning anyone trapped there is essentially penned in with the undead with little to no hope for support. But the danger doesn't stop at these two cities. Other major cities like Buffalo, Albany, and Rochester would also become zombie hotspots, each with large populations and limited natural safe zones. Harsh winters present another deadly factor, as surviving without heat or a reliable shelter would claim as many lives as the zombies. Rural New York does exist, but even there, you'd face a whole bunch of challenges like freezing weather, dwindling supplies, and desperate survivors fleeing the cities. Food and supply shortages would come quickly. New York relies heavily on imports, and like we discussed with Hawaii, once the ports and airports fall, goods will dry up. With so many mouths to feed and minimal farmland compared to the population, starvation will be rampant. Add in constant traffic jams, limited wilderness for hiding, and unrelenting urban sprawl, and New York becomes a literal nightmare for survivalists looking to escape. Simply put, New York is the worst possible place to be. The mix of overcrowding, brutal winters, minimal escape routes, and endless demand for resources creates a perfect storm of apocalypse disaster. If the zombies don't get you, the cold, hunger, and other survivors definitely will. If you enjoyed this countdown of the worst states for a zombie apocalypse, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more survival breakdowns. The end of the world might not be coming tomorrow, but it never hurts to be prepared.